Welcome to the Unofficial Seminar. How have you been? I hear you have now the tag of the Director for Internationalization at Cebu Tech University, Philippines. How does it feel to shoulder such a huge responsibility?
Well, this is what God wants me to do now, so I praise Him for putting us in this position. But where have you been? I mean, it's been a very long time, and now we're back together. That's the most important question.
We started the Bilateral View, I think, a few months prior to the autumn of 2024, and it's been more than 1.5 years since then. The Bilateral View is still very much live. My students tell me that they watch the episode on Sherlock Holmes a lot. So you and I started the Bilateral View, and since then, I've been thinking of creating similar platforms for conversations on YouTube, and this appears to be the outcome of those dreams.
Yeah, that's what I ultimately want to ask you tonight. Why the Unofficial Seminar? Because many people are intrigued about why you're moving from Bilateral View to this platform. I know there's a reason for that, and I want to hear it from you, straight from you.
The Unofficial Seminar, to be absolutely frank with you, is not a rival to any podcast channel. The Bilateral View, as the name itself suggested, was about two people or two kinds of voices, and you and I were the two representatives of, probably two cultural perspectives. The channel, like I said, continues to exist. The Unofficial Seminar, on a different note, is I founded it in the March of this year. So it's been less than 1.5 months since I founded it. And it was also partly inspired by the memories of this philosopher who passed on in March of 2026, very well known for his notion of communicative rationality, Georgian Habermas. So I think communicative rationality is something that we need to prize, and the Unofficial Seminar therefore prizes communications, it prizes conversations, intellectual conversations specifically, and in an unofficial capacity.
Well, many high notes were pointed out in that speech of yours, but this is something that we want our audience to hear as well, because storytelling seems to be sprouting from all corners, and we want to also address the very idea of what really has to be told, what kind of stories we have to tell them. In the Unofficial Seminar, I'm getting it. You're with various people in India and in some parts of the world. What kind of stories do you actually tell?
Primarily the stories that I feel have been left out, and primarily also the stories that are not covered by the official seminars. There's lots of official events happening all across the globe. Now, since I'm based in India, there are people obviously who've thought that the Unofficial Seminar is like a riposte to some specific seminar that somebody organized somewhere. No, it's not. It's not. It's not trying to hint at or trying to target any organization, official or unofficial. The Unofficial Seminar is actually talking about or hopes to talk about stuff that is getting left out. I mean, surely everything seems to be online, everything seems to be on YouTube. At the same time, the academia does not value certain kinds of conversations. This is what I feel, and particularly in relation to social history, to economic history, to gender history, and other ideas. So there are canonical ideas in every space of the world today. There's a right-wing canonicity, and there's a left-wing canonicity, and there's a huge space in the center which is getting left out. So I think the original impulse was to reinvigorate the center.
Wow, I could recall something about my study, the peripheral, and of course the one at the center, and you're trying to, highlight this time that one at the middle, and this is a very strong ground, to start really these very impactful conversations. Address this, because I know that you're the lord of pun, exactly, in many of your writings, the unofficiality of the official and the officiality of the unofficial, because I know basically why you created this Unofficial Seminar. It's based on something that you concocted. Please tell us about that.
No, I'm not at all the lord of. I don't find puns a very high form of art, unless Shakespeare did it. I don't know why that tag gets attached to me. I don't at all. If there has been any pun, it's been completely incidental and unintentional. Anyhow, the Unofficial Seminar, you are not entirely mistaken in this case, because it is very interesting that when I was growing up, myself, there was a company, a beverage company. I don't mind mentioning it. It's Pepsi. I mean, I'm sure you would have seen that in the Philippines as well. So,
Yeah.
Coke and Pepsi are two rival, soft drink manufacturing companies. And when I was growing up, Pepsi used to advertise itself as being nothing official about it. So Coke was the official sponsor, and Pepsi was the unofficial, beverage. So maybe that stuck out a bit, and I carried that memory. But honestly, like I said, there's too many events happening all around the world, and you are now the director for internationalization, Dr. Magan, and I don't intend to rub it the wrong way, but surely you would be, if you were honest, you would reveal someday that God, why so many events? Why are we doing it? Who's benefiting from it? So partly, I think that was the major, the major impulse rather than a beverage company.
Mm-hmm. But talking about the childhood days, even the memories, still, there's something about you that people could jump into as, okay, as this. Arup, or Professor Arup Chatterjee is the guy who really values the ontological aspects of things. And this very idea of getting into the unofficial zone, yet very official, is ontological in a way because it excavates what you had, which is still very relevant in today's era. And that is the history of something that you want to talk more about in your podcast.
I have experienced, Dr. Magan, that there are many people like us, and I'm counting you and a lot of the other people who have, with whom I've been having conversations, is that, whether it was the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000 when you were growing up, there are many people who have been privy to conversations of a centrist nature. And when I say centrist, I mean conversations of a nature which is neither necessarily canonical, which is not coming from a religious orthodoxy, which is not coming from a social orthodoxy, a Marxist orthodoxy, or a right-wing orthodoxy, but people are just sharing their stories. People are simply sharing their experiences and trying to arrive at a middle ground, be it a local train. Now, you've been to India, you must have probably heard of a local train, how passengers travel, in these private trains. Be it the street side cafe, be it the theater. There are many thousands and thousands of people out there whom we are unfortunately leaving out of our official conversations in the academia. And if you are a Marxist, you start dubbing them as these right-wing nationalists. If you are a nationalist, then you start dubbing them as these radical communists. If you are this gender, then you start dubbing them as that gender, and so on and so on and so on it goes. The unofficial seminar is about conversations that we are leaving out from our very important academic conversations. The academia is a very influential place, I believe. However, there are the powers that be are snatching away the powers of the academia. The academia is feeling more and more disempowered. So I do not think the unofficial seminar is an official part of the academia, but it wants to be an honest soldier fighting for the academia nonetheless. And in the process, it wants to bring alive conversations. To give you an example, the 1990s, when I was growing up, probably you too, and I had a conversation with a colleague of mine, somewhat of a senior scholar and intellectual in the unofficial seminar itself. And I myself spoke about it in a national podcast recently. I wrote a couple of articles as well. So the 1990s is a very interesting time in many parts of the world, including the Philippines, including Southeast Asia, China, and South Asia, India. So the 1990s does not get discussed in the academia in a standard history, lecture, or a standard English literature lecture, and probably I don't know, maybe a geography lecture, maybe a social science lecture also. So I thought of discussing the 90s. So that's just one example.
Well, I always think about this platform as a way for me to ask those very important questions about history, and one of which is, how much do you love history? Because basically the unofficial seminar is latching on to historical accounts, and you vividly show them the importance of history every single time. How fascinated are you with history?
Oh, thank you. That's a rather kind way of asking that question. There are people out there who would have multiple barbs in such a question, Dr. Magan. So you're actually being rather kind, I must say. I'm not a historian in the strict sense of the term, and I've never claimed to be. Nobody has claimed on my behalf either. none of my employers, none of the institutions I've been with. But my life, my professional life, in a sense, began with writing the history of a multinational audit and consulting firm, and I had to therefore train a lot in economic history. My first personal book, which I published in my name, was the history of the Indian railways. So naturally, after having written two histories of such big institutions, naturally, I started at least learning the ABC of history,
Yeah.
if not holding professional degrees in that subject. I continue not to identify professionally as that tag. However, of course, I'm a cultural historian, and I continue to write and think about history. And regardless of what some critics or some those who appreciate might say, I think my path is very straight. The cultural matters that have occurred in the past and that continue to inform human experience, because history, I believe, is a study of human experience in time. Those are the three main values. It's experience. It's about experiences of humans, and it's located in time. So those aspects of culture that have occurred in the past but continue to inform the present, and regardless of what is the exact historical truth, culture tends to remember the past in multiple ways. And there are reasons why, good and bad reasons why cultures do that. Why cultures create mythologies, why cultures often believe in comforting lies rather than truths. I think this also has rational explanations. So I'm very often, giving those rational explanations or trying to find them rather than argue for whether was this the exact veridical truth or was that the exact veridical truth, which also I do, because I do a lot of archival studies as well. But that's about my individual writing process. I don't wish to bring that into the unofficial seminar. In the unofficial seminar, I want to give space for multiple kinds of perspectives.
Yeah, that brings me to question the very core of bilateralism, the one that we did before, and that's very obviously giving the people the comparatives. But obviously, you're also doing comparatives here in the unofficial seminar, because you see, you're talking about the social culturality of, say, India, and as you said, multiple perspectives. It's more than the comparatives. How beautiful is it for you to always do that? Because essentially you're coming from India, and you are the one who's more authentic enough to talk about these perspectives, diverse ones.
Well, first of all, there are many people in India who, or indeed in any part of the world, who may not be considered authentic enough to represent their society, because we are living in very heterogeneous societies. Even the Philippines, and when you explored the history of the Ramayana in the Philippines, you told me multiple times how diverse Filipino society and Filipino geography is. So even a place like the Philippines, which is geographically not huge, is excessively heterogeneous. So I'm probably not necessarily authentic in every Indian view. That's surely number one. Then I also find it very interesting that in the unofficial seminar, I really stick to very canonical subjects like philosophy, like storytelling from incidents in history, incidents of the past, about books and so forth, in the short style videos, videos that are less than 3 minutes or sometimes 1.5 minutes. I also have, I think, done a couple of short videos on what might be called theology, although it's not theology, but that too is part of philosophy or political philosophy. Whereas the conversations that I'm having are surely quite bilateral. And there are certain conversations in which I am mostly quiet. I do not, talk much at all. I simply listen to certain conversations. There was one with a professor from Rhode Island that I did, and he spoke about how the restoration of the monarchy in Japan and the Meiji restoration in the 19th century can yield lessons for India. Okay, and that was very interesting. Then there was another conversation I had with a corporate lawyer on what a company is and how companies get into multinational privileges and start ruling over nations. Then there was a professor who spoke about Indian feminism and linked it to Indian scriptures. So there are multiple conversations, not necessarily about India. Some are general, some are India centric. And I really hope to bring in diverse points of view, which might not be always welcomed by the left or the right, but is very much part of the center.
And this is beautiful how you're channelizing these ideas into one platform. And as you can see, there's that sort of license that we can see through the entire conversation, which we spoke about earlier. You're saying you're not the authentic person, or you're not bringing the authenticity of everything that you see around you, but at least you have the platform through which you can be heard about certain aspects in your society, and in fact other societies, because of the people that you're interviewing are coming from different parts of the globe. So talk about this license. How significant is this, to convey to people that every time you tell a story, or at least you channelize the story of one person in your podcast, there's this sort of believability, the understanding that this is what he's trying to say, and at some point, whether or not you believe it, that's the story itself.
That's a very challenging question, and I think broadcasting to people is a matter of great responsibility. And one should have necessarily faced lots and lots of public challenges, social challenges, ideally before beginning to do that. It is not easy to talk to a public, even if you believe that you are proficient in a certain language. If your ideas are clear in your mind, you still do not have a license in the mind of a certain community or an audience necessarily. A, you have to cultivate that audience. B, you have to cultivate a great sense of responsibility. C, you have to unite that responsibility with that audience. About license specifically, I think it's very difficult to gauge whether what you're doing is, number one, meant for the larger good, which you intend to, but you have to find the right subjects, and you have to find the right idiom to communicate. Number two, I think it's very difficult to gauge which are the exact, let's say, questions that you want your guests to talk about, because surely you can't say that one guest or one type of guest is or one type of subject is better than the other. That's I don't think is the right spirit. The better spirit rather is to understand a subject and the ideas of a person, the intellect better, and try and ask the right questions. So, for example, I particularly find your last question really interesting and very important. I'm not sure I'm the best intellect to answer that, but that's a very good question. So I have to constantly work on those questions, Dr. Magan. So none of these conversations are scripted. We do not hold scripted conversations. At the same time, exactly like you and I are having this unscripted conversation. But at the same time, surely the people who come are huge experts and very confident in their fields, and therefore they are really comfortable answering with great clarity.
Right. The unscripted version is very, not just challenging, but dynamic in a way, because the way people receive us tonight is going to be diverse as well. And that creates in them a space in their heads that allows them to think more reasonably about certain situations. And I think in that respect, you have achieved your purpose. So where do you see this platform moving forward? What else do you want to do? Aside from getting these various perspectives.
Yeah, I think I didn't answer your last question wholly. I think I missed out a tiny detail. You probably asked about whether broadcasting is also about some kind of, I think whether it gives a certain degree of influence, or I don't exactly know what you meant, but I suppose broadcasting or making your views heard, maybe that's the phrase you used, is making your views heard is becoming increasingly a responsibility, Dr. Magan. I feel that way. Because when a lot of people, and I metaphorically said thousands and thousands, but what I mean is hundreds of thousands and in manifolds of hundreds and thousands, when so many people have stopped making their views heard, what we have is loss of cultural memory from generation to generation. I'm not saying that all my knowledge of the past is correct. Indeed, a lot of it may not be right in my personal capacity, and in my professional capacity, I'm trying to understand why the past or understandings of the past contain so many fallacies and so many mythologies and so many kinds of contradictions. But at the same time, if I do not live out my cultural memory, if I do not hold those centrist conversations without a political agenda, now I know everything is political. I'm not going to deny that. The personal is political, people say, and I believe it. I really don't mind. But but it's not as if the personal is electoral. It's not as if everything has to be guided by electoral agendas. We are human beings first, and then we are electoral people. We are citizens first, whether a Filipino or an Indian or a global citizen. Therefore, I feel like this platform should serve ideally people's responsibility to be heard, no longer just a right. Now, to come back to your present question, I think the way the unofficial seminar should go, if I, being the founder, if I could steer my vision clearly, then I think it should feature more and more conversations about India, surely, and indeed all the other subjects that concern India, like gender, like history. By subjects, I mean all the other themes, the burning issues of India should also be addressed by intellectuals from all around the world, not with relation to India, but with relation to their own cultural experiences. So, if in India the Ramayana or the Mahabharata are major texts, if in India the Gita and the Quran and the Bible are major canonical texts, literary texts, or whatever kind of label you want to give them, if in India gender and gender reservations, women's reservation, for example, is such an important theme, then I believe these need to be discussed in a more holistic way, not simply canonical and orthodox ways, depending upon what the government is saying or what the opposition is saying. And people from all across the world should also be, given this platform to discuss their experiences with respect to these themes. And surely, if they want to, bring in new ideas about something, who knew that the Maranaos of Philippines have such a vibrant tradition of Ramayana, for example, right? So I think there are so many stories waiting to be told in this.
Okay, this is this rather sounds repetitive, but I want to ask the question in a more defined frame. How does the unofficial seminar galvanize the DNA of storytelling in general?
Yeah, you've been asking that question, and I think that's a very important question, because storytelling is such an important feature that today the algorithm, which is basically the euphemism for public attention, the storytelling is basically what is guiding people's attention. And storytelling often is also about about comfortable lies, like I said. You have to understand that is what political rhetoric is doing. That's what George Orwell meant when he wrote Politics and the English Language. He said how through language you can manipulate people's minds, and just simply by tweaking certain words you can create dishonest stories. The unofficial seminar is not about dishonesty, so storytelling is not in that capacity. So I think it's a learning curve, because by stories you don't mean fiction, you don't mean a novel, you mean what is the narrative of the unofficial seminar. Surely that's an evolving process. I think it'll evolve. I remain committed to communication that is centrist, that is not radical. So, one of the basic idioms of the story of the unofficial seminar is non-radical centrist kinds of communication, and that should involve the topics that we don't generally discuss in the academia, like religion. That should involve discussions on economic history, because by history we generally mean histories of identity politics, but histories are of multiple kinds. I mean, come on. There's a history of the earth as well, which is known as geology. So I think those subjects should also get a break. So stories of multiple kinds of identities, not just the human species. That's another important level of storytelling that we ought to focus in the unofficial seminar. Finally, I think Dr. Magan, we need more communicators like yourself. We need dynamic, charismatic, flamboyant communicators like you, and I don't mean just you. But you are an amazing example of that. Being a director for internationalization, you know what I mean. I mean, you've had such a long professional journey, and communication, catching people's attention before the electoral ideologies catch their attention. I think that's another challenge that the unofficial seminar has to live up to.
Okay, I think we have to go to our final question, because this is very important, a form of conclusion to this conversation.
It almost feels like I'm in your podcast channel rather than mine.
I mean, coming from Professor Arup Chatterjee, the creator of the unofficial seminar himself, how do you wish to redefine communication in light of the many things you have talked about tonight?
I think communication is something that our parents or we as parents have brought their children, or we might bring up our children to think that, oh, you've got to be fluent in communication. It's something that you have to master. I'm going to teach you. Yes, that is partly true. You can acquire communication skills through your acquired language skills, through your degrees, through whatever asset development, intangible assets of speech, of eloquence, etc. Communication, however, also, Dr. Magan, I increasingly realize in this station today, is about failures. It's about lapses.
Mm-hmm.
It's about perceived misunderstandings. Surely, a lot of the miscommunication and misunderstanding around the world today is fictitious, but it is bearing real life consequences.
Mm-hmm.
People are suffering real life consequences for completely fictitious hoax, misunderstandings, and misinterpretations. And you and I discussed on we discussed, if you remember, non-verbal cues. Now, non-verbal cues are also language. You are an expert in non-verbal cues, body language, and those get misinterpreted, don't they? Because from culture to culture it varies. So I think communication is also about failures, Dr. Magan, and one has to embrace those failures and move on. So it's not only about the amazing success stories on LinkedIn. It's also about the stories that don't go into your LinkedIn profile, and you've got to cherish and embrace them. So embrace success, embrace failure, embrace this journey very, very diligently.
Brilliant. What can I say? This has been a very fruitful conversation, Professor Chatterjee. Thank you for allowing me to ask these questions. And yes,
my pleasure. It's a privilege, Dr. Magan.
Hear a lot more from you on this platform. So thank you.
Next time, I assure you, you'll be the one answering my difficult questions.
My pleasure. Thank you, Professor Chatterjee.
Dr. Magan, thank you to your institution. I feel very proud of an institution which houses 80,000 students across 23 campuses, of which this amazing colleague of mine is now the director. And Dr. Magan, wonderful to have you back in this podcasting medium. And I really very much look forward to talking to you on the Unofficial Seminar, and we will be hosting this on the Bilateral View as well. We'll be collaborating. So thank you so much once again, Dr. Magan.
Yeah, have a great night. Mayunga VE, Professor Chatterjee.
Namaste.